I've been following along with Disney's once abandoned river country for over 12 years now. It's of course the once derelict and decaying water park that was located at the Fort Wilderness campgrounds along the shores of Bay Lake in Walt Disney World. For years it had stood as a prominent abandoned theme park, until one day it had disappeared with a promise of development. In a crazy turn of fate, that development had also seemingly become abandoned thanks to the pandemic, and once again would sit there unused for years. But recently, I made a trip out to the property to see what things are looking like. And well, finally, it looks like the tides are beginning to turn with a flurry of new activity. The seemingly dead project at the former abandoned river country is beginning to reanimate. So let's take a trip back to this infamous site and see what things look like today. This is the River Country 2025 update. So I last made an update video here back in early 2022. At the time, things were looking pretty rough. Disney had long demolished the abandoned theme park back in early 2019, making way for a new Disney Vacation Club resort that had been announced the year prior. It was called Reflections at Disney Lakeside Lodge, and despite all of the site work well underway with the foundation and pilings even in the ground, work had then just abruptly stopped. The Walt Disney Company reacted to the pandemic with a very risk-averse mindset, canceling a slew of major park-related construction projects. The Reflections Hotel, while allegedly already being fully funded, was so early in its construction that Disney could just easily pull the plug on it and face little consequences. And that's exactly what they did. They removed all the construction workers and supplies, laid down grass seed, and just simply left it there. Disney never really made an announcement of what the status of the project was. It had simply just been removed from any public acknowledgements, and there was little to no evidence of it existing on Disney's public sites. By 2023, the company had seemingly moved on. They were already working on a new Disney Vacation Club resort at the Polynesian. That tower, which bears a striking similarity to Reflections, had opened in December of 2024. The Reflections site, meanwhile, was left dormant over at Fort Wilderness. And this is around when I last visited the property. Work walls surrounded much of the Pioneer Hall area, with Clementine's Beach behind a fence, with everything past it appearing abandoned. The former playground and beach area had now been taken over by foliage, and the actual hotel site was no different, with construction materials strewn about and the foundation for the tower now slowly being taken over by nature. It was a pretty surprising sight to see, and I remember thinking how there's no way things will last like this here. It really made Fort Wilderness an unpleasant place to be around the shoreline. But time would continue to pass, still with little to no work done. By early 2024, Disney had actually cleaned up Clementine's Beach and moved the work walls back, once again reopening the beach. This is where the private beachside and treehouse villas had been planned to go, but for now at least, it had been reopened as just a normal beach area. Some more backstage work was also underway. The employee parking lot, which up to this point had been a hastily formed series of roads on the abandoned project site, had now had a real paved parking lot. This was the first permanent development on the site in years, and this parking lot seemingly lined up with the former construction plans, so it may have been a future indication of further work to come. Indeed, in the background, things were actually happening. Disney's site-wide construction permit was set to expire in February of 2024. Disney reacted by submitting a request for a 5-year extension. This would be followed by a few other permit applications, indicating that work may resume on the project at some point very soon. This would be followed by a sudden reactivation of the site, with cranes and work crews showing up on the property in November of 2024. Later that month, Disney officially confirmed that the project had been restarted, announcing that the resort would continue construction and be expected to open in 2027. They also announced a name change for the property, going from Reflections, a Disney Lakeside Lodge, to now just Disney Lakeshore Lodge. No further concept art had been released, indicating that the property would be more or less exactly the same as the original project. And that concept seems to be supported by what the site looks like today. River Country, now the Lakeshore Lodge construction site, is fully underway. A population of cranes now occupy the immediate skyline of the area, and those former foundations and outlines of the original resort have now gone vertical. That seems to indicate that much of the original concept for the resort, at the very least, is occupying the same footprint as it had before. More likely than not, the current tower is just going off the same overall design as originally announced. That means the overall shoreline area of Fort Wilderness is about to have a towering modern structure over it. And already from Clementine's Beach, you can see the advanced construction process. The beach area today is pretty sparse, with a fence line bordering just behind the construction. Clearly, this wing had been built atop the former abandoned footings in the ground. It's now the tallest structure on property, and just to its south, closer to Pioneer Hall, the former pathway that once led to river country now leads directly into the active construction site. Elsewhere, much of Fort Wilderness actually looks a lot better than it did. All of the big construction fencing has been largely moved, and with the two beaches back open, the shoreline looks a lot more put together. There are still some rough areas, like this dock that used to be used for the rentable boats. It's in rough condition, clearly disused. Further back towards the camping sites, there is some other light construction going on. Some older pathways are currently closed, with the entire bus stop shuttered and temporarily relocated to the newly paved employee parking lot. The somewhat newly built Tri-Circle D Ranch is now finally seeing its thematic companion getting built. Remember, this was a brand new building first constructed to move the animals from the new hotel. But of course, when it was built, the resort that it was going to complement architecturally had seemingly been cancelled. So the ranch was left as a weirdly modern structure out of place at the campground. It wasn't known if the resort would ever actually get built, so this was seen as the only relic of the pre-COVID plans. So that leaves us to today, and it now looks like, at the very least, a modified version of the former Reflections Hotel will now be built here by 2027. And look, I don't have any super strong feelings about Fort Wilderness, but I don't think there's any point in denying that this new development will dramatically change the landscape of this property. Already, this construction project is rising above the fence line and eventually tree line to create a pretty out-of-place modern hotel. That clashes pretty carelessly with the existing structures on the site. Like, I'm not sure how this massive modern tower will blend in with the rustic log cabin aesthetic this area has had for over 50 years. It would have made a lot more sense to build something more akin to the original DVC hotels slated to go here in the late 2000s, or better yet, something more aesthetically closer to Wilderness Lodge. Why didn't they just do that? But then again, Disney is set on changing that Fort Wilderness look, now replacing all of the original log cabins to the new, modern DVC villas. Disney just seems to think that their guests want something more modern. And maybe they're right, they've obviously done focus group testing, so this new resort just carries on with that design. So I guess love it or hate it, this is the future of Fort Wilderness. Certainly, it's a long ways from the days of river country. It's always crazy to look back, especially through my own catalog of river country updates through the years, and watch the site go from a forested, abandoned water park, a thing of Disney and Urbex urban legend, to an active construction site that itself was left abandoned. Despite all of the work that had been presumably done with the design and engineering, then to the demolition and land clearing, and finally with the initial site work, it was pretty insane that it had all just been abruptly stopped at the dawn of the pandemic. As months then turned into years, with the whole project sitting abandoned and overgrown, I honestly wasn't even sure if they would ever restart this project, especially after other DVC construction projects had been started and completed within the same amount of time that Lakeshore Lodge had been sitting canceled. But finally, after nearly 5 years of sitting dormant, the project is once again back on and slated for opening in 2027, just 5 years after it was supposed to open. Of course, I'll return to the site when it does open. That will actually be a momentous occasion for me, as it finally brings a close to the River Country saga, one which never seems to be all that predictable. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this very quick look at the River Country site as it stands today in 2025. My name is Jake, and thank you very much for watching.